What's up guys, I'm Weezlb Pro and today I'm going to be doing a detailed tutorial on skydiving and other skydiving techniques. And I'm basically going to be going over everything that I know about skydiving as I understand it. And hopefully you guys can understand it as well and you'll learn a thing or two. And let's get right into part one. Okay, so I'm just going to be going over the whole left joystick thing. I mean, I can't really tell you how far to push forward because there's no actual amount. The only way I can show you is by how far my hands lean forward. So right in this picture you can see I'm just free falling. My hands are face down. And then in this picture you can see that I'm pushing forward on the left stick a very tiny amount, and you can see that my hands are tilted. If I push just a little bit more, then you're going to see my hands tilt even more. They're going to go to about 90-degree angle, and the palm of my hands will be facing the screen pretty much perfect. And that's pretty much like the sweet spot for wingsuit flying. If you need to speed up because you're running out of altitude and you need like just a little bit more space, you're going to do something called speed flying, and that's where you tilt your palms perfectly towards the screen and then you want to push forward just a tiny bit more, and it's going to make your palms just angle up a little bit and your character will lean forward just a bit more. And then if you're pushing forward too much, this is what it's going to look like, and basically you're not going to get very far if you're flying this way. If you're jumping to do a gap or some kind of stunt and you jump at the wrong place, you're going to end up flying like this if you jump too close. Usually it's best to just free fall because you're going to have more control and more time to actually figure out what you're going to do, what to do in that moment. If you're just going to start diving, you're going to start relying more on luck and just random stuff that happens, hopefully for the best. Okay, so in this clip, I'm pretty much just going to be showing you, for when it comes to terrain flying, it has more to do with following the contours and cracks and crevices of the mountain from top to bottom. And so there's a lot of people that don't really find it interesting, or they say it's not creative or it's boring. They don't understand what it actually is. If you look at what wingsuiters do in real life, they map out a mountain from the jump point to the point where they're pulling their parachute. And what they do is they make sure that there's enough drop off or contour of the mountain in order for them to make it all the way. And so what terrain flying is, basically you're trying to get as close to the mountain as you can for as long as you can. And the closer you get for the longer amount of time, the better it is. And in order to accomplish that, you actually have to get creative and find those spots on the mountain. And so there's a whole lot more to it than what you just see on the surface. And so when it comes to terrain flying, as you can see in this clip, I'm trying to match the angle of my hands to the angle of the ramp that I'm flying above. Now, if you were to pretend that the ramp is the mountain, then you would be trying to match the angle of your hands to the mountain in order to get as close for as long as you can. And so that's kind of the whole premise behind that. If you have any more questions about that, you can leave questions down in the comment section and I'll be sure to answer every single one of them. Okay, so when it comes to jumping, either base jumping or jumping from a helicopter or whatever, you're going to want to learn how to jump fly, which is as soon as you jump and get into the skydiving mode, you're going to start flying immediately. You're going to start gaining distance as soon as you start losing altitude. So as soon as you jump, you're going to want to push forward just enough to be slow flying. And so that means that your hands are just going to be barely tilted forward. So you're going to be barely pushing forward, but you're going to be barely pushing forward pretty much at the same time that you jump. So, and as as you get into the skydive mode, you're going to be already pushing forward, and then you're going to start pushing more forward, but very slowly. And as you do that, your character will get the most potential distance from the point that you're jumping from. So if you jump from Maze Bank and you want to see how far you can fly, using this technique is going to give you the upper hand. When you jump and you go directly into speed flight, as you can see, there's a difference right here as I drop down so much more than in this clip where I don't drop down quite as much. You can tell by the difference between this clip and this clip. So remember, when jumping from helicopters or buildings or motorbikes or cars or whatever, always make sure that you slowly graduate to the speed that you want to fly in order to get rid of the drop down when you first jump. So when you first jump, you're going to drop down a little bit if you go directly into speed flight. If you first jump and you go straight into slow flight and then ease into speed flight, you're going to start flying immediately, and then basically you're just going to gradually go faster. Because when you are free falling, you already have speed. So when you lean forward, if you're already free falling, you can go directly into speed flying. But when you first jump, you're not moving down fast enough to go into speed flight. So if you go into speed flight right away, you're going to drop down a bunch to get speed in order to start moving forward that fast. But if you start, when you first jump, you have enough speed to start slow flying. So you start slow flying immediately, and then you go to normal flight and then speed flight, and then that's how you control your speed in order to have the upper hand in a skydiving situation. Okay, so right now I'm going to get into all the different bail techniques, and I'm going to start with 180 ejects. And so that's when you're in a jet or in a helicopter, you can jump out or eject yourself from the jet or the helicopter. And what you're going to want to do is, right as you're opening the door of the helicopter or opening the canopy of the jet, you're going to want to push your left stick all the way down, and then you're going to want to push R1 or RB in and out, or pretty much when I do it, I kind of hold it in and then let go. So I do that right before, like right as I'm getting out of whatever I'm getting out of. I do that button combination, and then I do a 180 spin before I am completely in skydiving mode. So it doesn't really slow you down or change the timing of your eject or anything like that. It just, it makes you face a different way. So basically what it is, I figured out one day you can trick your character to kind of mimic the jet controls while it's like changing over, because when you're in a vehicle, your controls, you're dealing with change. And so when you get out of that vehicle, it goes back to your character controls, and so they change. So between that, pretty much like while you're doing the animation to get out of whatever you're getting out of, it's going to glitch. So when you're in a jet and you go to, you know, turn a little bit right, you're gonna rudder right, and you're gonna hold that button. So while you're ejecting, if you hold that button, if you push down, it gives you a 180. If you push right, it's going to give you a 360, and you're going to turn 360 degrees. If you push the left stick to the left, you're going to do a left turn. So that's basically how that works. It's going to take you quite a few attempts to actually get the timing perfectly until you can do it every single time. And using the 180 eject to do a backwards gap is usually really useful, because you get a lot of speed, and you'll notice like while I was flying backwards, I wasn't pulling back, because when you're moving backwards, you can't actually do anything to gain momentum. So pulling back isn't the same as pushing forwards when you're flying forwards. So pulling back actually will slow you down from moving backwards. So you just what you want to do is just piggyback the jet's momentum and just go as long as you can. You can turn like maybe once You can turn once, but maybe twice. But that's pretty much as far as it's gonna go. As you turn, you'll slow down and lose momentum, so you can't turn that much, and you can't gain momentum while you're moving backwards, so that'll be the end of that. Moving into bike bails, I mean, ramping your bike up into the air and jumping off isn't really rocket science. I'm sure everyone already knows how to do that. But when it comes to jumping off the bike facing backwards so that you can do a backwards stunt, even some people that are seen as the best skydivers still don't really know how to do that. I'm not sure why, but it's pretty simple. All you really need to do is, while you're up in the air, aiming your bike to where you want to go to jump off, you make sure your bike is upside down, and then you're gonna turn your left analog stick to the right, and because you're upside down, your bike it'll look like it turns left, and as it does that, you're gonna get off the other side of your bike and you'll be facing backwards. And so you can get off your bike already facing backwards, so when you get off your bike sideways or whatever, you don't have to turn around at all by the time you get to the gap. So when it comes to bailing out of a car, basically the only thing that you really need to worry about is making sure that when you jump out of the car, that the car is as flat as you can get it. You don't want it too much on an angle, or you're not going to bail out the car, you're going to fall out the car. And then last on the list, we have dive gaps, and this is something that I figured out. I was trying to do a backwards gap over, like, through a bridge over some water, and I kept going into dive position, and then eventually I just dived like through the gap and then into the water, and I figured that's pretty much almost cooler than actually doing a backwards gap and pulling your parachute. So I started doing a bunch of different dive gaps, and they're actually really awesome. There's a lot of different creative things you can actually do with them, and they're easy to do. You just gotta fly low over water, and so that when you jump out, you're not gonna go into skydive mode, you're gonna go into dive stance. So you're gonna jump out and you're gonna go straight into diving, and so you can line up yourself so that when you jump out, you go into the dive stance, moving at the same speed as your vehicle that you're jumping out of, and then you can actually thread yourself through gaps and then dive into water, and it looks really, really cool. So the last point I would make on that is that when you're in the dive stance, you are invincible for like most of the time. So try and make sure it's that whatever you're doing looks clean and stuff, that you're not like bouncing off a bunch of bars, else it's just kind of a fail anyway, or it would at least look like a fail. So that's one thing to take note of, and that's about all I got to say about bailing out of stuff. Okay, so I took some props and set up some lines so you can distinctly see the difference between pulling your chute when you're speed flying and pulling your chute when you're dive flying. And in this clip, I started pulling my chute at that thin line, and that's just reaching for it. It started opening by like right at the first line, and then it was fully open by the third line. In this clip, I'm dive flying, I start reaching for my chute right here before the thin line, and then it only starts coming out by the second line past the thin line, and then it's only fully open by about the fourth line. So doing stunts, especially if the gap is long, if you're doing a long gap and you kind of have to go as flat and as far as you have to go, you're not going to be able to do it if you're dive flying. So you want to make sure you learn how to speed fly. And I find the best way to approach a gap is when you're just normal flying, and then if it looks like you're going to come short, you can start speed flying. If it looks like you're maybe too high up or whatever, then you can start slow flying and then maybe speed fly right at the end before you pull your parachute. So that's just some tips for doing long gaps. When it comes to tight gaps, the best thing I could say for like the best time to pull your chute, I find it's usually once you kind of level out with the top of your gap, so like the border of the top part of the gap, once you level out with that, then it's usually the best place where you pull your chute, because as soon as you reach for your chute, you drop down a little bit before you straighten out. So you always want to pull your parachute before your gap, unless the gap is big enough that you can pretty much fly through it without pulling your chute. Try refrain from pulling your chute really early so that your parachute is pretty much opening through the top of the gap. It just looks really weird when your parachute strings are glitching through solid objects. And if you can refrain from making it look messy, you might as well make it look as clean as you can. So the next thing I want to talk about is the landings. So right here, you're going to notice that I kind of swing to the side a little bit. And that's because every time you do a gap that's kind of lower to the ground, it makes it harder to land on your feet. And you always want to make sure you try and land on your feet, especially if it is possible. Any gap that is above 1 story high off the ground in this game, there's enough time and space for you to pull your chute and land on your feet. So you always want to make sure you're aware of that. Now, as you notice, when my parachute opens, I kind of swing to the left a little bit. That's because as soon as my parachute canopy has fully opened, I'm pushing R1 and then L1, or RB then LB, and that's basically that gives you a little bit of lift, and so you get like a second or two extra to kind of land on your feet, and so that actually helps a lot of people out. And that's pretty much it. I mean, there's a few other tips and tricks. Things like when you're flying with other people, you want to make sure you never bump into them, and obviously, and you also want to make sure you never fly over them, because if you fly over, like just over someone else, you'll probably kill them and you will lose your balance and commit suicide. So proximity flying is actually a lot harder than it looks. Like when you're flying with someone else down a mountain or something, it's a lot harder than it looks, simply because if you ever come near that person or you hit that person, you usually both die. So it makes it a lot harder when you got 2 people doing something side by side when it comes to wingsuit flying. I mean, when you're on motorbikes or in cars or even in jets, you can kind of bump into each other a little bit without killing each other. So you always want to be aware of where you are and where other people are when you're flying with other people. Another tip would probably just be, when you first start out, make sure you're flying, because when I first started learning how to do this, I didn't really know. When I was pushing forward, I wasn't really sure if I was moving forward or not. So I was looking at my mini-map and I could see that, you know, there were streets and stuff that were passing by, and I was like, okay, so I'm moving now. And it also depends where you do it. If you're in the open air and you push forward, you're not going to feel like you're moving forward. If you're close to the ground and you push forward, you're going to start moving forward, but then you're going to have to pull your chute or you'll die. So there's a few things like that might come up that I didn't go over that you could always just ask down in the comment section, and I'll be sure to give you detailed explanations and answers down there. And so that pretty much wraps up Skydiving School. I hope everyone enjoyed and understood what I just went over, and I'm Weezlb Pro, and have a gaptastic day.